they rise from their graves again.
Dad!
Give me my son back!
Vampires!
Hello and welcome to Ycft. Welcome to part 2 of our Salem'S Lot series. See, last week we did the 1979 miniseries. If you haven't watched that yet, highly recommend you go give that a watch. This week we are doing the feature sequel to that series called A Return to Salem'S Lot. Not Return to Salem'S Lot, A Return to Salem'S Lot. So it came out in 1987, 8 years after the series.
Yep.
Was directed by a guy called Larry Cohen, who, interestingly, had actually penned a script for the miniseries that they ended up not using.
Yes.
I do believe they should have told him that that series never got made before he made a sequel to, because this is not a sequel to that miniseries. It feels like the sequel to something that was never made. So, before I get into a synopsis, this was a rough watch. So
this was painful.
yeah.
This is needed. Where's mine?
You didn't ask me for one. This is my bit. Do you want a bit? It's toffee.
No, it's all right. But yeah, this was
interesting. Yeah. It's look straight out of the bat. This is not good.
It's not great. It's not good. It's okay-ish.
Yeah. So
there are things to enjoy. There are things to appreciate about this.
Yeah. When you break down the story to its bare bones, so it's about Joe, who is like a documentarian.
Yep.
He goes out into the wild to film indigenous species for documentaries and whatnot.
Yeah.
He is reunited with his son,
who's troubled,
called Jeremy, who is a bit troubled, is causing a lot of problems for his ex-partner and her new rich husband. So he decides to take him for the summer. He has a choice between two different places. Can't remember the main one, but the other option.
Yeah.
He decides to go back to Jerusalem's Lot, where he grew up.
Yes.
To a cabin or like a cottage that his aunt owned. Really run down. So then they arrive there and they find out that the town is overrun with vampires. But not recently. These vampires have been there for a while and they have a whole civilization.
Yes.
They are civil vampires run by a governor. They have schools. They are except for the most part, vegetarian.
Yes.
Which we'll get into in a little bit. They have human drones, as they call them, who are humans born from vampires who look after them during the day. And they have this whole world, they obviously come alive at night time.
Yeah, they literally play out their entire existence at night, like civilized. They're civilized vampires.
Yeah, they lured him there so that he could write a chronicle, their Bible, their history.
Yes,
I'm like, I really like that. That, as you break it down, is a really interesting aspect. I think there has been stuff that's been inspired by this.
Yeah, it's right. So the concept of the movie works.
I might have ran out of compliments.
Yeah, that's where it begins and ends. The concept of the movie works. There are some really interesting ideas, like vampires living in this little secluded town. They just kind of mind their own business. They keep themselves to themselves. They live their entire existence out at night. They are civilized. They want to have their own version of a Bible to, document their story.
What I said about them being vegetarian, they drink cow's blood. And, well, one thing I know they don't kind of say this, but from a logistical standpoint, you're not going to have an easy life if people keep dying in your town.
Yeah.
So you can't really keep luring people. They only drink human blood on special occasions, like weddings, which is what we kind of see.
Or holidays.
But they also bring up human blood is tainted, like at the time of the AIDS epidemic.
Epidemic. Yeah.
They don't want to risk
health problems.
Yeah, health problems. So they drink cow's blood.
Yeah.
But they don't kill the cows. The cows, they'll regenerate this blood in a week and they'll be fine. It's like, okay. Yeah. This is really... that's something that could have went on to eventually inspire, the likes of True Blood.
It's interesting. Where the film falls down is its execution of the story.
And the fact that it's not a sequel to...
It's really not.
Salem'S Lot.
It's not.
My problems kind of start with, it wasn't filmed in the same town. It was filmed, I believe it was filmed in Europe, and you can kind of tell it doesn't feel like the town, like Jerusalem's Lot.
No.
From Salem's Lot.
Yeah.
It feels like another world. And
yeah, it does. It does.
And continuity-wise,
It's shot
it
to shot.
doesn't make any sense.
No.
Which is your biggest problem with this one.
It's my biggest gripe. So as we were watching it, I was getting confused because I was like, well, I don't recognise any of the characters here from the miniseries, and it's like, okay, well, even if they've changed actors, you know, the characters' names would still be the same, but I'm not getting any of that. And at no point in this film do they really make any attempt to bridge the gap with the continuity. It's like, yes, it's set in Salem's Lot, but for all intents and purposes, this just could have been a standalone film without any connection. Like, there's no mention of Ben Mears, there's no mention of the Norton family, there's no mention of any of those other characters. There is zero mention of Barlow.
Barlow
predominantly
is when we first watched this, I thought I saw the front cover for the sequel, and I saw this. It's basically the same poster.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, great, Reggie got to return as Barlow because he didn't get that much screen time. Kurt Barlow is not in this film, yet he is the prominent figure on the poster for this film. This film should have been sued for false advertising.
100% absolutely should have been.
Right there, that was a disappointment that we didn't have Barlow.
Yeah.
Throughout the film, you get hints of a Barlow-like entity, which we'll get to a bit later. I suppose the biggest... Right, I'm trying to make links here. We have a Toby Hooper link, but not a Salem's Lot link. Daniel Pearl was the cinematographer on this, and he was the cinematographer on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So there's parts of this, especially I think the nighttime sequences, that look really nice.
Yes.
Because Daniel Pearl, he's a great cinematographer.
He is, yep.
But also this is, to be fair, it's not his best work.
Yeah.
The acting is...
atrocious.
Someone needs to... What's the lead actor called?
He's called Michael Moriarty.
Did someone tell him he was in a movie?
Someone should have told him he was in a horror film, because you would not think it from the guy's total lack of urgency throughout this entire film. I can't get past it. The continuity was a huge misstep for me. I couldn't really forgive it for that. But when we are following characters and actors who aren't likeable and who aren't showing any kind of sense or acknowledgement that they are in peril, it kind of tied into the pacing of the movie too, in that the timeline is not made very clear into, you know, how long Joe and Jeremy, his son, are in Salem's Lot. The only kind of sense we get of it is when we see the chronicle that he's writing eventually be like, you know, a book.
Yeah, so it's like he must have been there for a while.
So, all right, so we've been here for a while. All right, well, that wasn't properly kind of alluded to, but okay. When you go from watching the miniseries and you've got David Soul as Ben, who is, for all intents and purposes, you know, like our protagonist, like we see the action through his eyes. He's a likable character. He's engaging. He's charismatic. No offense to Mike.
He's pretty fit.
He's pretty fit. Then we go to Michael Moriarty, who, you know, no offense to the guy. Like, I haven't seen anything else. He was in Pale Rider, which is a film I like. He's actually all right in that. But I can't get behind Joe as a character. And
you know who I can't get behind even less?
Jeremy.
I'm sorry.
We're stuck with two actors who are just not fun or engaging in any way.
And I think their stories are meant to mirror each other.
Yeah.
Like, Jeremy is sort of taken in by a lot of the younger vampires. What's really weird is the first night when they realise there's vampires around, Jeremy is taken to a wedding of two children. They don't tell us this, but they're probably like a couple of decades old at least, maybe 100 years old.
Potentially.
But he's just not arsed, not phased.
Yeah.
And the only accolade that this film has is that it introduced the world to Tara Reid.
Tara Reid, whose story is also completely sidelined. So Tara Reid is a little girl vampire who takes a shine to Jeremy as soon as he arrives in the town with his dad. And it's very strongly implied that the film is going to explore this avenue of a little girl vampire seducing this, you know, human boy into vampirism.
Yeah.
You know, there's going to be some kind of a love story, like a forbidden love story. Forget that, because that goes absolutely nowhere.
But as it goes on, it's like, he starts out of a strange thing. Oh, has he been turned? Is he starting to be turned? Is he just being a bit of a dickhead? It's not really sure. And then you have his dad, who is also kind of being seduced by a vampire, but it's done much more strangely.
Yeah.
They introduce him to the love that he had, or the girl that he really fancied when he was a child.
Yeah.
Who's clearly turned not long after he lived there, because she's still in the body of a 17-year-old.
She's called Kathy, by the way.
Kathy.
Yeah.
And he just goes straight down to Bone Town.
Yeah.
With this...
Okay.
Oh, clearly she would be either older than him or the same age as him, but she is in the body of a 17-year-old girl. There's hints that they are being manipulated in some way, but it really is not clear. And when you go from like the child wedding to a middle-aged man banging a 17-year-old, it's really weird. Like,
yes.
but
All right.
in that way, I think it's meant to show afterwards anyway that Joe is resisting the urge to join the community, whereas his son is kind of giving into it.
Yeah.
I think I'm giving the film a bit more credit than it deserves.
I think you are.
But
I think you
that's...
are. All right. A couple of things with that alone. So,
There's
yeah.
also another scene with like a couple of homeless men that like are really pervy towards a bunch of kids without realising they're vampires.
Yeah.
And that is...
Come
there's
here,
a lot
girls.
I like the idea of vampires hiding as children in order to be able to like
There's something...
get their prey. I think
Yeah.
that... Again, this film has so many interesting ideas.
There's something really ominous about a vampire being in the body of a child, but having obviously the mind and the
lifetime
mentality of you know, like being over 100 years old. Like, that is eerie to me. Interview with a Vampire, I think, did that fantastically well with Kirsten Dunst as Claudia. Like, you know, mentally she's aging, but she's forever trapped in the body of like an 8-year-old girl or whatever it is. Like, it's wrong. It's
I
eerie.
remember there's a character, strangely, in... I think it's either True Blood or Vampire Diaries. I can't remember which of the two. But there's a character who becomes a vampire when she's a virgin. So every single time she has sex, it's like she's having sex for the very first time, and it's very painful. And she always returns to her original state afterwards.
Ooh.
Which, again, I think is like an add-on for stuff that they could have explored in this. And it's really interesting.
Great. That is interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah...
See, it sets up good ideas that other creators thought,
yeah.
ooh, I'm going to take that. I'm going to give that a try.
That's the thing. Like, so the Joe Kathy thing, yeah. So he's...
Also, does it ultimately affect the story? I know she gets pregnant.
Yeah, that's like a whole other thing that doesn't really like go anywhere. Like, yeah, so they want Joe to pen these chronicles, and they think a decent way that they can keep him and his son in the town is to introduce love interests for the two of them. So Joe is introduced to Kathy, his long lost love from all those years ago, and Jeremy is introduced to Tara Reid. I can't remember what her name is. And one of the biggest issues I have here is...
Is it the Tara Reid trying to replicate the window scene?
Not necessarily, but we'll get to that.
It looked cool, but...
We'll get to that. But Joe...
Well, I think that's all we really need to say on that. Is they tried to do it, it doesn't look as good.
Joe has sex with Kathy, like, I think the same night that he's made aware that they are vampires. And, like, initially he's obviously a bit perturbed, but then he just goes along and has sex with Kathy anyway, because, hey, why not? She's still fit.
I'm going to throw out a term from the early 2000s when Twilight was like, he wanted to be a fang banger.
Okay.
That was apparently a thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, he becomes one. And my issue is yes, it is ultimately hinted at that they hypnotize Joe, and that, you know, Kathy in particular has like cast him under some sort of a spell.
But you got to tell us this.
But you got to tell us this movie, because in the very next scene, after he's just banged a 17-year-old Kathy, vampire Kathy, he starts yelling at his son about how, no, vampirism is wrong, and like we need to resist these people, and no, you can't go off falling in love with a little girl vampire. Don't even think about it. It's like he becomes such a hypocritical
It's like, dude, have you even showered
character. Yet? And that's the thing. It's like he just comes across as a hypocrite.
Yeah, he's just really unlikable.
And he is not a likable character to follow. And okay, if the film is trying to suggest, well, he was under a spell, fine. But they don't underscore that at all. And so it's kind of left a little bit ambiguous. Is he just... He's got his like little vampire bit on the side, whilst also trying to tell his son not to be seduced by the life of a vampire.
Yeah.
It's like, well, you've kind of lost me,
yeah,
movie.
there's a couple of things I think could have made the movie better.
Also,
well, better writing, acting and directing. But... Oh, sorry, do you want to do that point now?
No, go on.
There's certain key... Like, the idea that his aunt invited him there. She is there, but they don't... she's not really prevalent in the story. They don't really have, like, a showdown. To me, I think she should have been the wife of the governor, the person who's leading the community. But they missed a chance to have a really good scene where they bunker down in her home that she's letting them stay in. They say, oh, no, I don't give you permission to come in. She's like, I don't need permission. This is my house.
Yeah.
That's an easy one.
Easy
One. But basically, she's not important. The only interesting line we get was like, were you always, even when I was here, were you always one of them? Which surely he must have noticed if she wasn't going out in the daytime.
If she was never aging.
But that's also interesting. Also, the Nazi hunter. I
Oh.
can't remember the character's name.
Oh,
This
God.
old man, but he is
Somewhere around here.
he is my favourite part of this whole movie because he's just a lot of fun whenever he's there.
Yes.
He's like this clearly like World War II vet
Yeah.
Nazi hunter who has come to the town.
Sorry, my note with it. There's a Nazi hunter in this?
Yeah. So he comes to the town because he's looking for the school teacher who is meant to be a Nazi. That doesn't go anywhere. He is convinced by reading the chronicles that it has somehow been written over the apparent few days that this is set.
Yeah.
From all we know as the audience. He's like, right, cool, vampires are a thing. We've got to do this.
Oh, yeah.
Then they go from day to day killing vampires.
Yep. Yep.
I'm like,
Okay.
there is never a showdown between him and the Nazi that he is hunting. Surely it would have made more sense for the governor to be the Nazi or from just to have been a vampire hunter.
Yeah. It's
But he is my favourite part of this movie.
He's a
'cause
lot of fun.
I had so much fun watching him.
He's a great... I
He
don't
hams it up in every way he can. He's fully dedicated
Yeah.
to it.
I love the addition of a Nazi hunter as a character. It's like,
But we
oh,
need to
this
see
is-
the Nazi he's hunting.
Yeah, give us a little bit of closure with that. Let's have a confrontation with that. That's cool. That's interesting. And then, like, Nazi vampire.
Do you remember the random bus full of people that arrive in the middle of the night?
Yeah, I do.
Just to be victims?
Yes.
You made us do this. Like, why is this bus here?
I know. Just to backtrack again to Aunt Clara, because there's so many things I want to address there. So yeah, Aunt Clara, if you were a bit confused about the continuity thing before and like, you know, trying to decide, well, actually, is there a continuity error or like, Aunt Clara kind of seals the deal for me because Joe asks her outright, were you always a vampire even when I was little? And she basically says yes. So if that is the case,
Then she must have been a vampire for the bare minimum of like 30 years.
predating Barlow's arrival in the town in the original miniseries, which doesn't make any fucking sense whatsoever.
This whole town
because
I do really like that in the school. The school play is Dracula.
is Dracula.
I'm like,
Yes.
all right.
But then they also, in that school scene, which again is just like weirdly paced, like
It's also
Joe
like,
and Jeremy
would
are
the
there.
kids
and,
need to go to school
If
if
they're
they've
like
been
a hun-
vampires for a very long time?
Yeah, unless it... I don't know.
How
Do the kid vampires still have like the kid mentality then? Do they not age... do they mentally not age with their actual age? Like, I don't know. It's not clear, guys. It's really not clear. But yeah, even that school sequence with the teacher, and he goes over the history of vampirism and like when they first arrived in the town and whatnot. And it's like, well, fucking vampires have apparently been in Salem's Lot for hundreds of years. And again, it just...
maybe it's just there's two towns called Salem's Lot that got invaded by vampires.
It would be more realistic than this is set in the same town than the 79 version.
You can't call this a sequel to it.
It's not. The director, bless him, he's just gone off and done his entirely own thing. I mean, yeah, I can get behind, even if there's no mention of Barlow, okay, but you've got to tie it into the miniseries.
Mhm.
You know, it's like, yes, this is 8 years on, but people will still remember the miniseries.
Yeah.
And it's like, there is literally
Especially if
such
you're
a
using
mismatch.
Barlow as the marketing tool.
Exactly. Actually, I am going to have a sip of this because I'm getting angry.
It's not very nice, I'm not going to lie. Yes, I could not for the life of me get a copy of this film. And I did try. It was hard enough to get the 2004 one, and that had to arrive in a damaged case.
Yeah.
But yeah, there is enjoyable stuff in it, but it's just, I found it annoying.
It is annoying.
It's even the scenes I like when they're going from in the middle of the day. Again, the problem, loads of vampire films I have, it's like, oh, for some reason we've woke up mid-afternoon.
Yeah.
We need to go and do this before sundown. It's like, come on.
That's what I mean.
But I liked it when they go from house to house. There's some cool way. No one vampire dies in the same way, which is actually a Lost Boys thing. Mm-hmm. So that would have been inspired by Lost Boys because they do all die differently, but it's always very quick. It looks cool, but you don't really have time to like settle on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's little things that you things that you like the governor and his wife going into their own little coffins, even say, "Oh, good day, dear."
Instead of good night, obviously.
I really like that.
I
That's
like that.
cute.
They've got their little pajamas on, and again, civilized vampires. I like it. There's order to the town, and it's like, yes, we are undead, but there's no reason that life can't carry on in its own way just at nighttime.
Do you think Midnight Mass was inspired by this a little bit as well?
Potentially.
Purely because there are scenes of them burning buildings and burning coffins, so the vampires have nowhere to go, which doesn't work really well because we still see lots of buildings, but that is what they do in Midnight Mass.
They literally scorch earth the place. Yeah.
Which
it works.
is a really interesting idea.
It is interesting. I just like the storytelling is a bit confusing. Once you kind of realise that continuity means nothing, it's like, well, okay, I guess we're just in like no man's land then. But there are just some things that I also just can't forgive. And I keep going back to Joe not being a likeable main character. There is no urgency with the guy. One of the notes I wrote was, why the fuck isn't he rushing his kid out of this town?
Yeah.
It's like as soon as he realises...
We only see like 2 or 3 drones at most guarding the place. They could be overpowered.
They could literally
And they do overpower them later on.
Easily. Just get out of there in the daytime. But it's like, he knows his child is in danger. He knows they are going to use Jeremy as a way to keep them both in the town. Like, that he knows that Jeremy is being seduced by this little girl vampire. Jeremy is toying with the idea of becoming a vampire. And he doesn't do anything about it. He cracks on. He just cracks on in writing his chronicles.
Doesn't care that he has a child come on the way either.
There's a line where they're having a chat in the daytime, and he looks at Jeremy and he's like, "Did you get laid last night? Your son is 11 or 12."
Did you get laid last night?
Who, me?
And he even his son, like, and bearing in mind, Jeremy is a troubled kid, like, he's a little bit of a rebel. Even Jeremy is like, "Dad, I'm a child." Like, what? Where did that line come from? Why is it delivered in such that really lackadaisical way? It's so frustrating.
The final act, when they've captured Jeremy, because again, they are perfectly safe in the church. The vampires didn't desecrate the church.
No.
So they are perfectly fine just to stay in the church.
Yeah.
They leave
the church. Yes.
But then Jeremy is captured and they put on the play, the performance, and it looks like they're about to like stake Jeremy. And I'm like, well, what was this your plan all along? I don't really.
Yeah.
But it does lead to like, again, a really cool moment between the governor. I can't remember the governor's name.
It's just the governor.
Between the governor and the Nazi hunter, like they have like a bit of a conversation, but it's like a monologue off.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed.
Yeah, that was good.
That.
Yeah.
But we find out that the weird creature that we've been seeing like lurking around every now and then, it is the governor.
It's the governor.
And they have their final like fight, and it's so like, again, you can tell it's like this older guy like in the makeup, and they're fighting, and there's like, it's like a workshop, which is a pretty good place to have to fight a vampire. To be honest, it's like there's lots of tools. You need hammers for those stakes.
Lots of wood.
But it's like it's really badly done. This feels more like a TV movie than the miniseries does.
Yeah.
And there's a really badly overdubbed line where he goes, "You made me show my true face." I'm like, what? Yeah. I think I rewound it because I was like, what did he just say?
We've been quoting that with each other so often.
You made me show my true face.
And it's so bad. Oh, and of course...
It's like Tommy Wiseau's The Room level of bad acting. They stake him with the American flag.
It didn't. Yeah.
To be fair, in the 80s, it was probably a very new thing.
Look, it's a scene. It didn't work in The Patriot when Mel Gibson kills Jason Isaacs with the American flag. It doesn't work in Return to Salem's Lot either. It is such a corny, cliched way to do it.
If you look at it a weird way, this town of vampires represents the American dream more than real life towns do.
In a way,
so
yes.
It doesn't make sense for him to be killed by the American flag.
Yeah, but I guess, maybe we're giving the film...
You made me show my true face. I don't even know if I'm going to need to find clips for this.
You're just going to have to take our word for it.
I'm probably just going to need to find the trailer.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I do think maybe the director... I think you're probably giving the director and the film a bit too much credit here, but I guess you could say, like, it is an exploration of the American dream. It's just... what does it say when it's vampires that actually do it better than humans? You know, vampires are actually capable of living in harmony, the undead, than, you know, more than humans are.
Yeah.
But I think to say that is to give it a bit too much credit, ultimately.
Yeah. I wouldn't pay to rent this movie like we had to. If it pops up on streaming,
Yeah.
it might all be on YouTube. We never know.
Yeah.
I hope it is. Just out of pure curiosity, if we were to have a top 10 list of worst films we reviewed on the channel, which we don't have, because I think we've been quite lucky. We haven't reviewed that many terrible films.
No.
But currently, this and Jeepers Creepers Reborn are on there.
Reborn is still worse for me.
Reborn is still the worst, but over time, I know that list is going to fill out. But so far, like, this is the second place. Because I assume he's went out there and he's tried his best, and I will always respect anybody that can get a movie made, because it's hard.
It's hard work. I'm not taking that away from anyone.
But it doesn't make it good.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. And
There's some enjoyable cheese to it, but you can't go in there thinking, oh, this is a follow-up to a Stephen King-inspired masterpiece. It's not. It's awful.
I think, as you say, Larry Cohen, he clearly made a film based on his idea of the original Salem's Lot.
Yeah.
Not the Salem's Lot that was ultimately released in 1979. And I think, honestly, like we've said, there are some really interesting concepts that are explored in this film. It's just a shame that the acting, the editing, the pacing lets it down massively. And unfortunately, those are things that are very important in a film.
From what I can gather, it had a very, very... we can barely call it a theatrical release. It had a theatrical release, and I think basically ended up on TV.
Yeah.
But it did have a theatrical release.
There was an interesting line, sorry, I don't know why you just triggered this, but at the end, when the Nazi hunter guy, Joe and Jeremy, they make it out on the bus, and I think it's Joe that he says something along the lines of like, oh my God, you know, like who's gonna believe us? Like, you know, if we tell our story, like who the hell is going to believe what happened here? And then the Nazi hunter says something like, in 500 years, who'll even believe in Nazis? And it's not necessarily that the line makes sense, or that it's even particularly deep, but I do find like it's an interesting concept.
Well,
you know, like one era's tragedy is another era's like legend or story.
Yeah. Well, to add on to that, part of the reason I feel like he is so quick to believe in vampires is because he has seen evil in his lifetime by man.
Yeah.
And it might be easier for him to believe that evil,
the undead walk the earth,
could be supernatural in some way, because it's easier than believing that
when you've lived through the Holocaust. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Again, probably what they were going for,
but just not executed well.
But it is an interesting line. It is an interesting idea.
Yeah, it is.
Just think that whenever we look back on in history now, things that are like hundreds of years ago, and think, oh God, how are these people, like Vlad the Impaler, for example? It's like, how was that? How was he a ruler? It's like, well, they probably will, like, in a couple hundred years' time, they probably will look back at the Nazis and be like, oh, are we sure these were real?
Yeah. It's an interesting idea how history evolves over time.
History dilutes over time.
It absolutely dilutes.
Especially when there's no one, like when you get to a time when there's no one alive from that time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Giving the film a bit more credit.
I think we are. But again, you know, nuggets of interesting ideas. It's just a shame. Like, it is a bit of a wasted opportunity because it could have been really good.
So we were a bit of a low point here after watching that. So going into the third and for now final incarnation, the 2004 miniseries. Before watching it, the only thing we'd seen is that everyone's like, oh, it's not as good as the 79 one, but the acting's really good. That's all we wanted going into this. Yeah. I just want something with really good acting.
Guys, the bar was set so low from Return to Salem's Lot that we were just literally wanted the bare minimum when it came to the 2004 version. We were like, okay, is the acting okay?
When you see like
that'll do
miniseries from 2004, it does make you go, oh no.
Yeah.
Were we pleasantly surprised, or were our fears realised? You'll find out next week. See you later, guys.